So when people talk about Caitlin Clark right now, they're talking about everything except for basketball. They're talking about the injuries, about coaching decisions, about her teammates. They're talking about what's going on in the media as narratives. Everyone seems to have some explanation for what's happening. But from my perspective, that's not actually the story. The real story isn't what's being said. It's what happens when all of those voices begin swirling around in such magnitude and what it does when it competes with your own voice. And that raises a question. What happens when the outside conversation becomes louder than the one you've got going on inside? So a few years ago, Caitlin Clark played with a kind of, I'm going to say, freedom that was just unmistakable. It was just so open and clear and confident. She changed the way people watched women's basketball. She took these impossible shots, like she just took risks because she could. She was creative on the court. She trusted herself. And whether you really loved her style or not, or you questioned it, or you had your critique or whatever, there was something really obvious. She was not playing to satisfy anyone, actually. She was playing from this place of clarity. But success changes the environment that you're operating in, right? Everything around you. And that leads us to another question. What changes when the expectations become bigger than the game actually itself? So every extraordinary performer, music, art, sports, what have you, they eventually reach this moment where the audience grows and grows and grows, and the headlines get huge, and your name is on every front page and every video clip. Every move you make becomes a debate. In her case, every shot that she misses, right? Every facial expression is analyzed and becomes a headline. And same thing with every injury, right? There's a theory behind it, or with every relationship, they create a story and someone else writes about it. So here's something I've noticed over many years of working with conflict resolution and in communication. And that is that external noise, that plethora of content, it has a way of pulling you into conversations that you actually never intended to have or be part of at all. And sometimes they're conversations with other people, but sometimes they're actually conversations that start going on in your own mind. And one of my principles is that communication isn't only what happens between people. It's also the conversation that you allow yourself to believe. That means that a narrative starts going, whether it starts outside or starts inside, and you take that as truth. You let that begin to be your guiding light. And that's where things become interesting. Because before outside conflict changes your performance, it usually changes your attention. Right? So what I mean by that is when things start to get conflictual and there's stories and there's information that doesn't align with who you are, what you know, that pulls you in. That's where your focus goes. So the question then becomes in those situations, what is it that you're listening to? So athletes or any professional that gets to that level of excellence, they talk about staying present or being in the zone, right? Psychologists talk about focus. I think about it a little differently. I actually think attention is relational. And what I mean by that is every moment that you spend, I'm going to say, engaging with someone else's narrative, managing what it is that they're saying, correcting it, justifying it, trying to understand it. I'm not talking about being in conversation with someone. I mean, when somebody has a narrative going about you, how are you going to engage with that? So, and then it becomes a moment where you're no longer really connected to yourself or to your own experience. You're actually engaging and operating from that interaction with what those people have created as far as the story goes about you. And that doesn't mean that you ignore feedback at all, right? It means that we have to distinguish between information that is useful to us, that has something to do with us, that we can benefit from or that we can take and improve ourselves by, and noise. Okay? So I'm curious, have you ever found yourself maybe performing for other people's opinions? Like you get feedback, you hear what they say, you know what they're talking about, you know what the story is, and you adjust yourself. and then you perform or present or act according to what other people around you are saying or expecting, instead of acting from that purpose that actually brought you to that place. If that's happened to you, if that resonates with you, I'd love to hear your experience in the comments, because I think that sharing with one another, helping each other understand that we all go through things but in a different way, allows us to learn from one another. Yeah? Because I think actually that this happens a lot more than people realize, or rather maybe than we talk about. So here's what I think is inspiring though. Every great athlete goes through seasons. Well, every person in general, right? But if we're talking about Caitlin Clark, every really phenomenal athlete has these phases that they go through. And not just seasons of winning and losing, but I'm going to say seasons of knowing themselves a certain way, of their identity or how they are in the world, right? So some of the seasons may be about proving themselves. Others might be about discovering more of yourself. Sometimes it may be that it's about building particular characteristics or a stronger career. And that brings us back to Caitlin Clark. So none of us actually knows the full story. Only she does. And the people close to her maybe know bigger pieces of it. We don't know every single conversation, and we don't know about every injury or what challenges she faces. And I think actually that's the whole point, because from the outside over here, like looking in on her, we're all watching like a narrative that's being fed to us, especially nowadays through social media or through media in general. But she's the one living it. It's going on for her, or in your case, it goes on for you. So that internal experience is the one that's valid. And in my perspective, that's the real challenge. It's not silencing the outside voices, because you're not going to do that. And why should you even try? I mean, everybody has their right to speak and talk and conjecture and so forth. But the challenge is hearing and knowing and holding to that voice, that narrative, that stance within yourself, right? Strengthening how you're grounded within yourself and what you know about what's going on for you. Because when your own voice either is clear or becomes clear again, the outside noise doesn't disappear, but it loses its authority. It like fades in the peripheral distance. And maybe that's the other Caitlin Clark effect, right? Not what pressure does to performance, but what pressure, I'm going to say, reveals about the relationship you have with yourself. Because eventually, right, every successful person reaches a point where their talent is no longer the question. Like they've proven themselves, to other people, like they've made it, let's say. But then the question becomes, can you still hear yourself amongst all of that noise that's going on? And if we look at history, if it tells us anything, the athletes who sustain their greatness, who like stay in the game the longest, they're not the ones that avoid pressure. They're the ones who learn to return to themselves again and again. It's not like they stay stagnant there. They enjoy the fans, they read the tabloids, they have the interviews, like they engage, but they return to themselves and they anchor themselves. They're standing in the ground of their being. And I have every reason to believe that's still part of Caitlin Clark's story. And it's not because every phase of life is perfect or every one of her seasons of playing is perfect, but because the strongest careers are not actually defined, I'm going to say, by only one season, right? It's what happens after that season, or what happens after all the noise has died down. So those are some things you can think about and how they apply to yourself. How well do you listen to you when the noise goes off? And maybe it's not in the big newspapers or media outlets, but maybe it's friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, what have you, right? That you hear this feedback and you hear their stories about you and what they're assuming and what they're concluding. And how can you stay anchored within yourself? Hear your own story. Stay with your own narrative. Something to think about. All right. So if this perspective gave you a different way of thinking about let's say, success or communication, being in the limelight, conflict, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. You'll know when new information comes out. And each week we look at some of the headlines, but we look beyond them. We look beneath what the stories are and what is our common humanity that's shared in those stories. What human patterns are actually beneath them. Because sometimes the biggest story is not what happened or what's on the headlines, right? It's what's happening inside us while everyone else is watching what's going on out there. All right. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. And until next time, be well.